Hello, friends. We're back with another fun episode of the Death with Dignity podcast. We've been wanting to give our audience an update to where things stand with medical aid in dying in California and in the U.S. I'm sure you've all seen some challenges to the law as well that we'll get into. Today's guest is perfect to help us navigate that space. Jess Pezley is a senior staff attorney at Compassion and Choices. Not only does she work on this stuff day in and day out, but she actually worked closely with Andrew on advocacy efforts as well, and they were real tight. We had a really fun time speaking with Jess. Her expertise and experience made her the perfect guest for the subject, and she'll help us understand where MAID laws currently stand and gives us insight into what the future holds. Let's get into it.
That's
It
cool.
was actually me, Andrew, and Tom. So I don't know if you knew this, but Hosba and Andrew and I were on that same video game team.
That's how we
And
became
Tom
close.
was the fourth person, and Tom, Andrew, and I played on the same line
Yeah.
senior year of high
So they
school.
have good chemistry, and I got to join in on that and see how it was. But, anyways, we can kind of get started. I'm a little rusty at this, so whoever's listening out there, excuse me a little bit, or give me a little slack. That's a phrase I was looking for. Um, Jess, we're really happy to just have you here. I've been just looking forward to talking to you. And I feel like you're the perfect person to just kind of get us back on what's happening with MAID and what's happening nationally and even locally as far as California goes. But before we get into all that, I kind of want to ask about you. Um, how did you get into this career path? What's your background? And yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Well, I went to law school. I was like, God, 20, 22, really young. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but didn't really know what that meant at all. But I wanted to work on constitutional rights. That was kind of my thing. Um, and so I really wanted to find a career where I could work to expand individual constitutional rights. And I learned about compassion and choices from an old boss of mine when I was a first year law student out in Oregon. I worked for the ACLU of Oregon, and my boss was Kevin Diaz, whose name you might recognize because he is now my current boss at Compassion and Choices.
Oh, he's the current CEO of CNC.
Yeah. So he and I just stayed in touch over the years. And when he made the transition to Compassion and Choices, I had no idea that this movement existed or this field existed, but learned about it from him. And I realized it kind of touched on everything I really cared about and provided me an opportunity to do the exact kind of work I wanted to do. And so that is how I came to Compassion and Choices. I mean, there's a lot more years in between and other jobs that I did. Um, but yeah, that's how I ended up here eventually.
And how long have you been at Compassion and Choices now?
5.5 years.
And what's your actual title, just for everybody?
I'm a senior staff attorney for the legal and policy department of Compassion and Choices.
Cool. And just for anybody who might not know, what does Compassion and Choices exactly do?
We are the oldest and most active nonprofit fighting for end of life rights. We work to ensure that individuals can access the exact healthcare options that they want at the end of life and receive the treatment that they want, make sure that they don't receive any treatment that they don't want, and just make sure that their wishes are being honored. And so we work to have the widest range of end of life options available in every jurisdiction so folks aren't limited.
Is there a defining moment or something that took you down this career path? I feel like it takes a lot of compassion and empathy, which a lot of people just don't have the experiences in life to understand what someone who's dying goes through. Yeah, so was there something that led you to this? This is what I want to do.
I think, like a lot of people, my first exposure to the movement was through Brittany Maynard's story out of California. She was in her 20s when she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, had to move from California to Oregon, completely uproot her life to access Oregon's medical aid in dying statute. Um, And her story became, captured, I think, the attention of the nation, and I was part of that. So
Oh,
that
you
was
were.
my
So you were
first.
part of that. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I wasn't really familiar. We talked to folks who have a lot of personal connection to the work, where they were exposed to it from a young age. They had family members with long, prolonged deaths. I've been really lucky that that hasn't been my experience. I My little sister had cancer when we were really young. She actually had the same kind of cancer that Andrew had when he was a kid, Wilms
Uh,
tumor,
yeah.
uh, which is like a really obscure cancer. I think, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I don't. You don't run into a lot of people that have Wilms tumor. But she had a stage 4 Wilms tumor, and she's fine now. So, but there was like a lot of exposure to um, hospital settings and medical settings, and kind of an understanding of death and dying at a young age. But um, I am luckily not one of those people who have had a super personal connection in my life, seeing somebody die a horrible death.
Yeah, even being exposed to like the healthcare space like that, that's definitely it stays with you, you know. Especially when someone you love is going through it like all that. One thing I want to touch on was your connection with Andrew. The whole reason so Andrew used to joke with me before I even knew who you were that he had a lawyer named Jess, and he loved being able to say, "I've my lawyer Jess." Do you want to like touch like upon your like a relationship with him and how you guys got connected and the work that you guys did together?
Yeah, Andrew. Andrew was the best. I wish all of my clients could be just like Andrew, because working with him was so great. So we became connected because there was a challenge to California's medical aid and dying law back in, I don't know the year. Let me look it up. Sorry.
It's okay.
All of the all of the years are just like um, melding
It,
together in my brain.
I think it was by like the doctors who were like, "Oh, we don't have to tell people about we don't have to tell our
Yeah.
patients about medical aid and dying."
So it was coincidentally, it was the Christian Medical and Dental Associations, which is the
Mhm.
same group that just challenged one of the abortion pills that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So they're really active in challenging laws that they disagree with, especially in the healthcare sphere. But yeah, so it was CMDA v. Bonta, and this was a case that was out of like around 2022 in California, and they were challenging um, the recently amended End of Life Option Act in California, saying that it compelled their speech. These doctors who did not want to prescribe medical aid in dying, but they were going further than that. Not only did they not want to prescribe, they didn't want to have to transfer medical records of a patient who was requesting. They didn't want to have to document their request. They really wanted nothing to do with anything. Um,
Yeah, they just
really,
want to like uh close their ears and just sing like la la la, and they just wanted to yeah. That
yeah,
was a weird
absolutely.
one.
Just these like baseline medical obligations they wanted to abandon because they disagreed with the individual choice that their patient was wanting for themselves. So that's how I got to know Andrew. Compassion and Choices was representing folks who were intervening in that matter. So the case was brought by this association of religious doctors and dentists, and they were suing the state. And so we intervened, or attempted to intervene in that case, so that we wanted to make sure that patients' voices were heard, and then also physicians who were prescribing and working with terminally ill patients, their voices were being heard as well. So that's how I came to know Andrew. The first time I called him, I could just tell that like he was very unsure of me. I think like maybe I crossed.
We all know skeptical Andrew.
Like I don't know if I was just too buttoned up, or like if he just was like, why am I talking to this lawyer? Like, you know, but things clicked pretty quickly. Like we were just having this conversation, and I think we both kind of dropped the facades that we probably entered the call with, and it just we hit it off. And from there, it was like so easy to talk to him. Everything case related. I'd call him about something related to the case, and then we would just talk for like an hour about everything. And it was just it was great. He was my client, first and foremost, but it really did kind of feel like he became a friend as well, which is, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew had that ability to, uh always like kind of treat people as friends first, and he really like carried the friendship moniker well. Um yeah, like I said, he said nothing but nice things about you, and it was cool to uh, meet you through him, and I know that it gave him purpose to be able to like help other people and be part of the cause. The one thing I want to touch on that you mentioned is there's an abortion pill case as well. I know it's not really connected with MAID, but there's I do think this is all kind of like connected. So are you saying that there's an abortion pill that the Christian Medical like Association is trying to get stopped from, so people can't even take a pill?
Yeah. This was a case that was filed in Texas very strategically with a very conservative judge in Texas. And it went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And they just ruled on it last term. It was, I think, the Alliance for Hippocratic Oath, which is a, a group that was created really just to challenge this abortion pill, which I'm going to say it wrong. It's like mifepristone. I always say mifa because it's easier. I think it's
Hmm.
mifepristone. Mifepristone. I don't. Oh, someone's gonna hear this and be like cringing because I'm probably
They
butchering.
make those names hard on purpose.
They do. They do. They're really
Big
hard to
medicine.
say. Yeah. So they challenged this pill and I think we're arguing that it wasn't authorized the way it should have been authorized and all of this other stuff. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court threw the case out on standing, saying that these folks really weren't injured by the existence of these drugs. They weren't prescribing them. They weren't being asked by anyone to prescribe them. There wasn't any risk of it, because doctors do have this right that if they disagree, on ethical or religious grounds, that they don't have to prescribe or provide treatment. Um, the same is true for medical aid in dying. So they're really similar cases. It's the same group being funded by the same large uh, legal organizations. I think it's Alliance Defending Freedom that's behind both. So
Yeah,
they're all connected.
I want to touch on the abortion thing for a second, because one thing that people don't realize, and I learned from you and like other people, is that it's not just abortion that's kind of like out there. It's also like some people have miscarriages, and there's certain pills that now that are hard to access for people who have miscarriages. So people who are trying to have kids, not even trying to have like abortions, and a
Right.
lot of people's lives are like affected that way too, which is again, it makes no sense to me whatsoever. um, but there's like certain
Yeah,
pills that would be, better for them, and they just don't have access to them, and that kind of is
for
really
sure. I mean,
unfortunate.
these abortion pills are necessary for healthcare. Whether a person is ending their pregnancy because they want to end it, or because they desperately want a kid and this pregnancy is not going to work out for them. Yeah, with a lot of miscarriages, not all of the fetal tissue is removed from the body just like naturally, and so you have to take medications to ensure that it's all out and make sure that you don't have an infection or something else. And so you see in states where that have these really draconian abortion prohibitions, where pregnant people are not being able to access the care they need. And there is another, I think it's out of Texas. A woman was pregnant, was having a miscarriage, wasn't able to, or she was having some sort of pregnancy complication. She wasn't a
Hmm.
viable pregnancy. I don't know if she was actively miscarrying or not, but she wasn't able to access abortion services, and because of that, she might be infertile now. And again, was a person who desperately wanted to have a child. It just, that pregnancy was not going to produce a kid.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people just don't understand this stuff. Even when it comes to medical aid and dying, like I've done a lot of research on this topic. I'm like thinking about it a lot. Me and Andrew used to talk about the opposite side. We used to just sit there and be like, all right, what could they be thinking? It all kind of came down to like the basics. It's just like a religious people who are very politically like active, and I just feel like the arguments get so bogged down and so confusing when it's pretty simple at the end of the day for like a lot of these things. And I was like, when I was preparing for this podcast, I was like, I don't want to get too political. Then I was like, this whole thing is political. You can't really avoid politics when you talk about these topics. But speaking of like about some more cases, I want to use this podcast as an opportunity for people to kind of catch up on what's happening throughout California and kind of the rest of the U.S. So I wanted to ask you about, I think it's United Spinal versus the state of California, where I think people who are disabled are saying that this violates the Americans with or yeah made violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. Do you want to talk about that case a little bit and where you guys are at with it?
Yeah. So, um, United Spinal is the case that pretty much immediately followed the conclusion of CMDA v. Bonta. So that case that Andrew was a part of, unfortunately, we never got the opportunity to intervene. The state and the plaintiffs in that case settled the case, um, and the case was dismissed. And I can't remember the exact dates of that dismissal. I think it was in May, but Andrew passed away before the resolution of that case.
So
Uh,
when they settle the case, what does that mean? They both just walk away?
so the state and the plaintiffs worked out an agreement amongst themselves to the state drop some of the requirements and agreed to pay plaintiffs a certain amount of money, and in turn, the plaintiffs agreed to drop the lawsuit.
Okay.
So we were not a part because we hadn't been able to intervene yet. We weren't parties to the case, and so we were not part of those conversations at all. And we, um, would have liked to have been, but we didn't get that opportunity. So as soon as that case was settled, we saw not long after United Spinal come. It was filed with the same judge in I think it's Eastern District of California, so a federal case. And yeah, you're correct that it's a group of individuals with disabilities and then some disability rights organizations that believe the law violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then California's kind of similar law. So that has been in the court system for a while. The case was dismissed at the trial court level, um, and they appealed. Plaintiffs appealed, and it's at the Ninth Circuit now. So it's kind of confusing too because there's multiple appeals at the Ninth Circuit. So we have also tried to intervene in that case. Um, the judge did not rule. The trial court judge did not rule on our motion to intervene. And he dismissed the case. And when he dismissed the case, he was like, and now the motion to intervene is moot. And so he then dismissed our motion to intervene, after the case had already concluded at that trial court level. So at the Ninth Circuit, there's plaintiffs' appeal. So that's the group of individuals with disabilities and the disability rights organizations, their appeal. And then separately, we have appealed the denial of our motion to intervene. So there's these two kind of appeals going on.
Yeah, I was reading about the case and I was like, I'm just gonna ask her. I'm getting confused here.
It's so confusing. So at the plaintiff's appeal of their dismissal, we tried to intervene in that as well, just to make it even more confusing.
Yeah.
And the court did not let us. They denied our motion to intervene in plaintiff's appeal, while our other kind of pending appeal is still going on. But so we submitted an amicus brief. And in that amicus brief, we talked about all of the reasons we don't think medical aid in dying discriminates against people with disabilities. At the end of life, when a person is terminally ill and eligible to access medical aid in dying, they pretty much necessarily have a disability under the definition of the
Oh,
ADA.
so they are disabled people then, right? I think that's what was confusing me, because I think of a person in like a wheelchair who, might have some, they just can't do a lot of like normal like functions. But anyone with cancer in their last 6 months to live is also a disabled person, correct?
Yeah, under the ADA's definition, I should look up the exact language 1 second because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, with the legal stuff, we got to be careful.
Yeah, you gotta be careful. You gotta be careful. Um, so
Just got to use the word alleged with everything. I've heard that that keeps the lawyers away from you.
there you go. Yeah, the ADA defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that significantly limits one or more major life activities. So when you think of somebody who is
Yeah.
eligible for medical aid in dying, they are going to be impaired in their ability to perform, major life activities, just because, unfortunately, that's the nature of terminal illnesses. And so Compassion and Choices is an organization that serves people with disabilities. Most of our clients, have disabilities. And I think we do, as a society, when we think of disability, we think of like a long-term disability that a person has had for most of their life. And disabilities can just affect you at a certain part of life where you might not have had a disability prior to an illness, and then because of the illness you do. So it's, yeah, I think we need to shift our understanding of what it means to have a disability. And so, I agree with plaintiffs on that point, that the individuals who are accessing medical aid in dying have a disability. What I disagree with is that that medical aid in dying discriminates, that the law discriminates against them. There are so many safeguards written into the law specifically to ensure that an individual's autonomy is being honored by making sure that, it's a voluntary choice for them, that there are other supportive services offered. The physicians have to talk about other end-of-life options. And it's something like 94% of people who access medical aid in dying are also on hospice. Like a really high number of people.
Like when you say access, you mean like actually take it?
Yes. Yeah, I believe that's
94%. Yeah.
yeah,
I think Andrew was on hospice as well when he took it.
he was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He was on hospice. Yeah, which is actually just wild, because yeah, that really makes you think about things like differently, because it just shows that anyone with a disease, even in a lot of pain, they are trying to live as long as they can. They literally make it to hospice. 94%. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's actually a really fascinating thing. It just shows, like, I think it just proves that point. Like, they're not trying to die. The disease is killing them.
Yeah, I don't think that's like more evident than in Andrew, who just, he didn't want to die. I mean, desperately wanted to live. Um,
Yeah.
and even with his having a terminal illness that was brutal, he still lived so hard,
Yeah.
until the very, very end. And so I think that's also a misunderstanding that a lot of people have with medical aid in dying, that somebody is going to get their prescription and then, the very next day take it. And that might be true for some people who aren't able to access the medication until the very end. But for the majority of people, they hold on to it. It provides, this peace of mind that they know that if things get too bad, they'll have this option. But they don't take it until like the very, very end, when they're just like in their final days of life.
Yeah, I thought about that with Andrew a lot, because obviously I saw his condition just get worse and worse, and I was always like, when will he like decide to do it? And it's just something I would like listen to him, but it's not like it's something I would give like advice on. I mean, like, who can do that? And one thing I'll say is, one thing that the thing I was surprised about is he waited basically till the end. I mean, like, that's the only way I can put it to people. I mean, his condition just got so bad, and at that point, yeah, I don't know. You're on hospice, and yeah, it seems like people have a will to live, and Medical aid and dying is one of those things where, again, we have, obviously you're a lawyer, you have to speak about it in like a certain way, with respect to the other side. But I have not found a convincing argument or anything like, especially for people with cancer. I mean, I have like a religious background too, so I'm like, oh, maybe God wouldn't like it or something like that. But even then, it makes no sense because you're gonna because like hospice is doing the same thing. You just get to choose. And the last thing I'll say about Andrew is I know that the peace of mind it gave him, and I feel like this peace of mind word is like so, or phrase is so important. It's like invaluable. I mean, that can really change your mind. Just a little different perspective on what you're going through can really just change your life and or the life that you have left.
Yeah, I think cancer takes so much from a person and just dictates so much of their life, what they can do, what they can't do. And I think just having this prescription on hand that you know that you can take if things get too bad, it allows you to just take a little bit back from cancer, just a little bit of your autonomy back to be able to make that decision. And cancer doesn't get to decide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of people who there's a lot of people every year. You can look in the every state um, that has passed medical aid and dying legislation. They also have annual reports where doctors have to report on who has like how many people have requested the medication, who ultimately took it. There's these numbers exist in every state where there's legislation, um, and there's a sizable number of people every year who get the prescription and never take it. Because for some people, it's just at the end, that's not what they want. They decide, make a different decision. And that's great. It's great that if this is something that they had on hand that made them feel better, that allowed them to focus more on living rather than fear of dying. And if they didn't ultimately need to ingest it, that's great. It's great that they were able to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, I think I looked up the statistics, and 37% of people in California that have the medication don't take it. Um, I think most of the people that do end up taking it are also like over the age of like 80 or something, but I don't want to get that stat wrong. Um, so yeah, I think I feel like there needs to be some kind of study done on 37% of people not taking it. But I have to say, and I'll go more like into this later on. It seems like that the stats vary depending on state and like country. Canada stats are way crazier than California's. Where I think California is literally the most like ideal model for countries and states to like follow. But one thing, just to talk about this case, is this case Spinal versus the state of California, is this like threatening MAID in California? How concerned should we be? I think it's a lot of BS, honestly. Like, I read it. I also want to give a shout out to Susie Flack, who's part of the a- amicus brief, and me and Strev both like read those stories, and honestly, those stories really like capture you. And I mean, obviously we knew Andrew, but there's all these other stories of like people whose names I don't have on hand, and their families, and they're just so like touching, honestly. And anyways, is MAID in threat, or is MAID yeah, should we be worried about MAID in California?
I I think with every legal challenge, it's a threat. There is reason to be concerned. I don't how concerned, how big this threat is kind of remains to be told. We were really thankful that the trial court dismissed the case and did not think that the plaintiffs had a viable claim. Um, but the reality is that we don't have a very friendly Supreme Court right now to our issue area, um, and we would be worried that if it does go up to the Supreme Court, and I think that's true of any challenge to medical aid and dying, um, coming from any state. This case, I think this case is unique in that I while I do not ultimately agree with plaintiffs, I think it's important to understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have, a very different lived experience than me. I don't have a disability, and I haven't had that experience of being an individual with a disability in the medical system. I think it's true that our medical system does not treat people with disabilities as they should. Obviously, there's a lot of flaws in the American healthcare system. I think we probably can all
Yeah.
agree with that. Needs work, needs work. Um, and so I think it's really important for us as a movement to understand these voices because they're part of the community that we serve. In that they're, in part of the disability community. These individuals don't obviously want um, medical aid in dying, and that's kind of the whole point. And for us, we say, well, you don't have to have it. There are
Yeah.
other end of life options. They argue that they're not accessible enough, and I think that's probably true too. We need to do a better job at making sure that individuals at the end of life are having their needs met and getting the exact care that they want. If they want hospice care, if they want, a live-in aid, those options need to be available, and they need to be accessible, like by being affordable, and so I think that all of these are good points. We don't disagree there. We just ultimately disagree with whether or not the statute itself is discriminating against people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
it's cool that like you guys are showing such compassion to the other side. I know I said it's BS. I think obviously the claim is like BS, but I mean anyone that's disabled, you're right. They have their own lived like experience, and they have their own challenges, and I don't want to diminish
yeah.
that either.
I think, when this case came about, I thought a lot about a conversation that I had with Andrew. Obviously, we all know Andrew was a special education teacher, and he um, worked with kids with disabilities. And I remember we had this conversation once. He called me out of the blue. I was at a coffee shop. I just like remember like being at the coffee shop and taking this call from him, and he was like, I've been thinking about this a lot, and he talked about how in his work, one of the most important things to guaranteeing success later for the kids that he taught was making sure that they had autonomy and that they had a choice and they were able to make choices for themselves and have that kind of independence. And so he strove every day, to honor their autonomy. And and then he talked about how for him it was just so hard that somebody was trying to limit his autonomy now. Um, and that just it really struck me, that's something that he dedicated his life to. And to me, it comes down to medical aid in dying is an extension of one's autonomy. It allows a person to make that choice if that choice is right for them. It also allows them to not make that choice
Yeah.
because it is fully voluntary. And an individual can decide that they don't want medical aid in dying at any point in the process. So I think that plaintiffs and I just have disagree on what autonomy means here and whether medical aid in dying um, limits or honors a person's autonomy. I think that it is. I think that allowing someone to make that choice at the end of life honors their autonomy.
So I wanted to touch on something you kind of or something that you briefly touched on. I want to expand on it. So how does the reversal of Roe v. Wade affect medical aid in dying and end of life options act federally, like just in
Yeah,
general? And I guess it's a multi-step question because I know Neil Gorsuch being on the Supreme Court, he's written like a lot about this too. So, anyways, if you want to expand on
yeah,
that.
yeah. Um, So the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision, they actually relied on language that came out of a medical aid in dying case. So back in the 90s, there was a case that went up to the Supreme Court that was trying to establish medical aid in dying as a constitutional right, like abortion was at that time. And the court came up with this test um, that was the deeply rooted in the history and traditions of the nation test, and said that medical aid in dying was not deeply rooted in the history and traditions of the country, and so therefore it is not a fundamental right that's protected by the Constitution. When the justices re-examined the abortion right back in a couple of years back, they decided that abortion was not deeply rooted in the history and traditions of the country. So the Dobbs decision doesn't really change anything for medical aid in dying, in that medical aid in dying was already not a fundamental right that's federally recognized. But it does, it's still worrisome, right? Like, I mean, obviously it's going to limit the ability for medical aid in dying to be recognized as a fundamental right going forward. You also have to question what other fundamental rights is the court going to examine, re-examine? Is the court going to decide that people actually don't have a fundamental right to refuse life support at the end of life? You know, that's been recognized since the 90s as well, even the 80s. I'm really bad with dates today.
Same.
Yeah.
In general, I suck with dates.
I'm getting like decades wrong here. It was either late 80s or early 90s, the Cruzan case. I think it was early 90s when it was ultimately decided. So yeah, you have to worry. And I think that the biggest concern is just what that case indicates for just healthcare autonomy in general. You know, the rights, of individuals to make these deeply personal decisions about what medical treatment they do or don't receive.
Yeah, and you probably don't want to speak to this, but I'll say it out loud. It also, I mean, that the Christian right, who's been like opposing a lot of things like medical aid in dying, they're in power now, and obviously that's gonna like affect things.
And we're seeing a lot more cases be brought up, you know, like CMDA v. Bonta, where the CMDA, this association, was bringing a First Amendment right, a free speech right. And we know that this court has, really strongly believes in free speech rights. So our opposition knows what they're doing. They're making the arguments that they know are going to appeal to this current court. And they're trying to get cases in front of this court. So, I do think, to kind of go back to your original question, I do think that there's reason to be worried. It's not a great time for individual rights in this country. It's not a great time for healthcare rights in this country. We're seeing cases, obviously, all of the abortion restriction cases, what they could lead to in terms of like contraception and whatnot. And then also all of these limitations on gender affirming care. So many states are passing bans on gender affirming care, especially for minors. And so I think that there's a lot of reason to be worried. West Virginia just passed a law that I believe a constitutional ban on medical aid in dying.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're like, we can't have medical aid in dying, like, no matter what.
Yeah, I think the language of, and this is true of like most things we see on ballots, right? They always use tricky language where it suggests it's doing something more limited than it actually is. But yeah, that passed in November.
Wow, that's really unfortunate for like people there. I always tell people, and gender affirming care, not that I'm sure it's like an important issue for a lot of people, but like I think that the stuff that we fight for has to be like a winnable. I think gender affirming care for minors is just not like an issue that was going to be popular like anyways. But something like medical aid in dying, that is just so universal. And the thing that annoys me is people always find out that it's universal, but maybe like later in life, at the point that they have an opinion, let's say in their 20s or like 30s or even 40s, maybe they haven't seen anyone go through excruciating pain. I mean, when we talk about like alleviating the pain of someone that's dying with like cancer, words just don't do it justice, right? They're going through excruciating pain, like shit, like I get a freaking cold sometimes, and I'm like, damn, that really got me good. But this is that like times like 100. Strev has a cold right now, actually. So shout out to Strev. but
Thanks.
but it's like I really think it's like the amount of like there's got to be, it's like wealth in like wealth inequality. People don't understand how much like money other like really like $1 billion is. What is it, like $1 million is like 32 years if you count it, and or it's like 32 days if you started like trying to count or something. $1 billion is like 32 years. Forgot the exact like analogy, but the amount of pain that people go through is just so like wild, and I just think it can't be measured. And you're trying to alleviate like the highest amounts of pain that's like out there, and my your body's just breaking down. But anyways, that
Yeah.
rant is.
I
I
mean,
just
yeah,
think it's a bigger. If like suffering could be measured, it's like it would be like the highest amount, or be like the biggest weight.
yeah. I mean, I think, death is universal. Like, I think that there is a lot of pain anytime somebody can't access the healthcare that they want, whether, again, it's gender affirming care, abortion care, end of life care. Like, there's a lot, there's obvious, so much harm um, in not being able to access critical health treatment that you need or want. But I think how death is unique is that everyone is going to die. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone's going to be at this moment. Not everyone's going to die of cancer. Not everyone's going to die of an excruciating disease. And you're lucky, if you're one of those people that doesn't. But everyone is going to die. So we do need to start thinking about end of life healthcare before we're at the end of life.
Yeah, we just need to talk about death. Exactly. Even like
Yeah,
abortion, which I think is an important issue. Not everyone really goes through that, or they even know people that go through something like that. So like the actual amount of people that experience that, like the cohort of people is a lot smaller. But dying, you would just think it has like the biggest coalition of people, because it's not
yeah.
like there's people that have learned that have figured out how to like escape it.
I mean, I do think, though, just to push back a little bit, I do think things like
For sure. By
abortion
the way, go. You should always push back on me.
they do affect so many more people. Well, first off, there's so many people that are receiving treatment or have received treatment we just don't know about. But
Hmm.
there's ripple effects too. Like, even if you yourself, obviously, husband, I don't think you're ever going to have an abortion,
Wow.
but you might
Not in the
have people in
cards.
your life who need to access that option, or people in your life who have had kids or who have been pregnant. And so, like, even if that's not a healthcare option that you yourself are ever going to need to exercise, like, it does impact you when those options are um, no longer available, because it's impacting people in your life that you love and care about. And it always kind of comes back to us. Like, we're all so much more connected than I think we even realize. And so
Yeah.
when we see these prohibitions go up, when we see healthcare options being removed from people, we're like, well, I'm not in that class of that. I'm not in that class of people that affected. Like, this isn't going to affect me, but it does affect you. And just from like a lawyerly standpoint, when we see these laws getting passed and when they go through the court system and are upheld, they're creating case law that says it's okay to remove these sorts of healthcare options. It's okay to prevent doctors from, advising patients on these things. It's okay to prevent an individual from leaving the state to access certain healthcare. And even if those cases were about abortion or gender affirming care, they will be applied to end of life treatment eventually. So it's all connected, and it's just a really scary time to see so many states just really like just passing really unkind laws, right? They just like
Yeah, very
don't
draconian.
care.
Not
Yeah,
not a big fan of this direction either. Just to
yeah,
be clear, I just think that like abortion is really misunderstood by people. Even like in popular media, they talk about these edge cases, which are actually pretty important too, by the way, like rape and stuff like that.
hmm
Rape of like a minor. But like I said, if you know that someone could have a miscarriage, and because of these abortion like rulings, they can't even get a pill for a miscarriage or something like that, that to me is just like absurd. But again, abortion, it's like the topic no one really wants to talk about too much. It's
Yeah,
probably one of the hardest topics in the world. But yeah, I don't like.
I like talking about it, but maybe I'm in the minority. Compassionate Choices obviously doesn't have a stance on abortion. So all of these viewpoints are my own, but but Compassionate Choices has written amicus briefs in abortion cases because they do see that connection. They do
Oh,
see
okay.
the way that allowing abortion prohibitions and restrictions can affect end of life healthcare, because it's the same justifications. It's the same. In some cases, it's literally the same plaintiffs challenging these different laws.
There's really one plaintiff, it seems like, doing all this. That's like the funniest part is like, I
Yeah,
think it's probably connected to like the Heritage Foundation or the Christian like Medical Association or the Catholic Church, which are all kind of like interlinked. Um, or Project 2025 even. Again, not to get too political, but it's a lot of the same people.
yeah, it's a
Um,
lot of same people for sure. It's the same. We have the same opponents, and so I think it's really important for us to have one another's backs here, and see the ways that we are connected. Even again, even if it's different folks who are ultimately going to be accessing these health care options, it's just important to see the way that we're all connected, and then defend these rights. We just submitted an amicus brief in a Montana case about gender affirming care. Um, uh, Montana has passed a ban on gender affirming care that is being challenged, and Compassionate Choices submitted a brief kind of talking about this. What Even though this case is about gender affirming care, about the rights of minors to get these healthcare options. Um, if the law were to be able to stand, what it would do is limit Montana's recognition of like their constitutional privacy rights,
mhm.
which has been extended to medical decision making, and so limiting it in this way that could definitely limit end of life care as well. Um,
So
so
okay, it's my time to uh, push back. So politically, again, I'm just thinking about this like straight up politics. What could happen? I do think, and some people say that the reason Trump won this like election is because he spent, I don't know what the number was, but it was like 100, 200, $100 million on that one ad where Kamala is like she's for they them, I'm for you or something like that, and I think she voted for. This was just something she did like a while ago too, but not that I'm a Kamala fan, but it was that she supported gender like affirming care for people in prison. They just ran that ad again and again, and to be real, it was effective. Even I was like, huh, really? But I do worry when organizations like Compassionate Choices, gender affirming care for minors, and like MAID, I could totally see how they're all interlinked because freedom is freedom. But when it comes to minors, I don't know if this is a good issue for organizations like you guys to get involved in, just because of the pushback, because of like more of the overall mission. What's right and wrong? Honestly, I'm not informed enough. If I could be real about it, I'm probably like more against that. Most people I know, almost everybody I know, if you just mentioned that, they're probably not super educated. I know that medical organizations do support it, so it's more complicated than my understanding. But I just think it's like a losing issue for if we're trying to get MAID federally legal.
so to be really clear, Compassionate Choices did not and does not have a stance on gender affirming care for anyone, because it's just not our issue area. But
Hmm.
why we entered an amicus brief in that case is because Montana has this constitutional privacy right that has been interpreted very broadly to extend to medical decision making. And
Oh, okay.
so it allows individuals to make these like deeply personal decisions about what treatment they do and don't receive. And the plaintiffs in this case are saying that this extends to gender affirming care. We know from past case law that it also extends to end of life care. And so you have to kind of look beyond the discrete issue to figure out the broader effect. So
Okay.
if we allow this constitutional right to be limited because we don't necessarily agree with what kind of care people are going to get in one discrete place. I personally think individuals should be able to get gender affirming care.
Cool. And
Um,
by the way, I appreciate that you're just open about it too.
yeah,
So
and then
yeah,
that's my personal view. It's again not Compassion Choices does not
yeah,
have any view on this, but that's my personal view. I think people should be able to access the health care that they want. Um, but even if I were to disagree with it, by letting this constitutional right be limited just because I don't like one certain kind of care that somebody else was going to get, it's going to have a broad effect. It's going to limit then the kind of healthcare options I do want. And so you just have to think like ultimately it's not up to the state to decide what treatment you should or shouldn't get. So if even if somebody else disagrees with it, and this is the same argument that we're having in like CMDA Banta and all of these other cases, just because these individual doctors disagree with it, just because these individual people don't want this option, doesn't mean you should limit somebody else from doing it if that's the option that they want. So I think it's just healthcare is such a personal decision, and our what we'd want for ourselves and what we wouldn't want for ourselves shouldn't affect what somebody else can have.
yeah. I do like agree with that. Freedom is really complicated, folks. The thing is, it's really not just about what you want for yourself. It's what you'll allow for like others, which is where freedom of speech is really important too. It's like, yeah, obviously I want freedom of speech for what I want to say, but what about what other people say shit you don't like? I did want to touch also on the Illinois bill. Again, our very own Susie Flack was in the news there. I don't know if you saw that clip. We're super proud of her. She's been doing some great advocacy work, and there's a bill being introduced. I can't believe it in the state of like Illinois. Do you know much about that, or can you speak to it?
I don't. So, I know that it exists. I know Susie's doing such great work. She's such an inspiration too, just like how much she has done for this movement, to carry on Andrew's legacy. So I know probably as much as you know, maybe even less than you know. But I have I've looked into it, and I have a personal interest, obviously, in seeing it passed. But I don't work on legislation at all. I only do court cases. So I know what my colleagues are working on,
Oh
and I
yeah,
know that
you're actually in like the weeds of the court cases.
yeah.
Um,
But I don't have like any special knowledge here, or anything more. Again, I think probably everything
yeah.
I know.
Well, we'll just tell the audience that, like, basically, what Susie has been doing is she's been meeting with like lawmakers and talking about like Andrew's story, and I think that they did introduce like a bill in like Illinois. I'm not sure if it has votes to pass or anything like that, or if it's at that stage. But even seeing bills like introduced, I think is like a positive sign, and she's done a great job of just like raising like awareness. My other question was more global. So I feel like we touched on like the a, local like events. So medical aid in dying, or I don't know what they're calling it in the UK. I try not to use the word assisted suicide, but I think in the UK they're calling it like assisted suicide, and that bill has passed in the UK now, which is actually a big deal because I think they didn't expect it to pass when it first got like introduced. But yeah, medical aid in dying or an end of life like option act might be a thing in like the UK. Do you have any like thoughts on that? Um, anything
No,
that you want to share?
I've seen the headlines in the news. I haven't like read the actual text of the bill. My hope is that it follows the American model with all of its rigorous safeguards and limitations. Um, that it follows the American model rather than like the Canadian model or what we're seeing in other European countries. I
Yeah,
think
it does. I think
okay.
like it does. I think it
I
follows the
thought
California model. Like you have to see two doctors. There's a waiting period, and you have to even have a judge say yes, but something like that.
the 6 months or less to live, and
Yeah, yeah, 6 months or yeah. So you
yeah,
have to have like a terminal diagnosis.
yeah. I mean, I think that those are really critical safeguards to making sure that um, really only individuals who are dying at the end of life are able to access it, and not folks with chronic conditions who do have treatment options available that might be able to manage those conditions, or I think that's really important.
So Canada, I have to. So I sent this stat to Strev yesterday. So Canada and California are compared a lot as far as like medical aid and dying goes, because they both legalized it in 2016. Since 2016 through 2021, 31,664 Canadians have died under MAID, or like trying to use MAID, compared to only 3,344 in California. So what? That's like 10%. So in Canada, a lot more people are taking it. Canada's criticized a lot, actually. I think that it's just more like expansive. It's not just about cancer, like either. I might be getting that part wrong, but Canada doesn't seem to be like a model that people that I don't know. It doesn't seem to be like a good model, because almost the numbers are too high. Because I think Canada has like 40 million, California has 40 million people. They both speak English, so it's very like comparable, you know. And I was trying to figure out why that is. The theory seems to be that a lot more people just know about it in Canada. There's more like awareness, where a doctor will like tell you. In California, it's like you have to ask the doctor, you know, what options do I have? In Canada, they just like tell you. I don't know what the right answer is there, but it seems like California is doing something right. So some people might argue wrong. I don't know.
I think that Canada's also has broader eligibility.
Mm,
So I think it's not just folks with 6 months or less to live. And I think they also extend it to folks that have like mental conditions
yeah, that's where it
as
gets
well.
hairy.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, that is not the model that Compassionate Choices advocates for. It's not one that I personally would want to see. And I don't think we will see the Canadian model in the United States. I think that there's a reason why we have those safeguards and have such a such narrow eligibility, and I think that that's important to maintain, to make sure again that this is really an option for people who are going to die and just want to avoid some of that those really really awful terrible pain at the very end. And that's why that's what we advocate for.
Yeah, most people in California, I think, that have taken MAID have cancer or like ALS or something like that. That is just severe.
Yeah, within the annual reports, the breakdown of what folks have, and I think overwhelmingly it's cancer followed by, I think you're right, neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah, neurodegenerative. That's a good word. But yeah, the Canadian model has me like a worried, but in general, I also think there's this lack of like awareness. I've talked about this on other podcasts, but I watched a news story. I watched a show called A Breaking Point, and because of the like UK bill, they covered a medical aid in dying. There's a left view and like a right view, which is stupid. Sometimes you just have one view. That's all there is. But they were talking about like Oregon and stuff, but I feel like a lot of people in the US, especially in the East Coast, the Midwest, states that don't have it, don't realize that California, one of the powerhouse state of the US, I would say, allows medical aid in dying. They weren't aware in their own news coverage, and these are people that cover the news. It's just, and then again, I've talked to doctors, I've talked to like other people. People are just not as aware of the fact that medical aid in dying is allowed in California as you would think. It's kind of
Yeah,
strange almost. Like you would think something like that would just be so, people would just know about it.
I think people don't think about death, so they're not thinking about what options are available.
Yeah,
When you're dying, I this country, it's just death is such a taboo subject. People don't like to talk about it. They don't like to think about it. And I get it. I don't always like to think about it and talk about it. I mean,
same.
it's death is kind of a bummer. It's like
Definitely a
it's
downer.
not
Yeah.
great, it's hard, and people, it's scary, and there's so many unknowns, and there's a lot of obviously grief, and it's a hard topic. I've gotten obviously a lot better talking about it because I get paid to. It's my job.
Hmm.
um, I
That's a
get
good
paid to,
incentive.
yeah. Um, but it is just something that's really hard. So I think that people aren't, again, people aren't thinking that they'll ever need this option. It's just not kind of entering into their minds as a possibility. Um, I don't think most of us have thought about, what healthcare would we want at the end of life if we were in a terrible car accident and couldn't speak for ourselves. We were in a persistent vegetative state or something. You know, would our family know what we want? Do we have documents in place to
I
say
know, yeah, that's so
like,
true. So many people don't. They don't have like, yeah, I mean, like a
yeah,
DNR. What the hell would you want?
right? We think about those things, like we'll have time, but we don't need those now. Those are for older
Yeah.
people. But the
Hmm.
reality is, we can get sick at any time. We can have an accident at any time. It's scary, and I think like it's scary, right? So people
Yeah.
just don't want to think about it, and by like having to have those conversations and filling out those forms, we're forced to think about it. We're forced to like accept and confront our mortality, and that is not a pleasant thing. And so
Yeah.
we avoid it. And so I
I'm
think,
gonna die. What?
yeah. So I think, I mean, that's part of it, right? It's just that people don't think about it. And then yeah, I think Compassion and Choices has been doing a lot of education to ensure that more people are aware of this option and to make people more comfortable talking about issues about death and dying. Um, but obviously, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I think that California has, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but they have struck the right balance because it's like you ask for it, then it's there, but it's not being pushed on you. You know what I mean? It's kind of like seems like the right compromise and the right way to do it. It's like if you're really in pain, you ask your doctor, "Oh, here's an option." But the doctor's not like telling you about the option before you ask for it. Again, I don't know what the right way to do it is, but I feel like there's something. It seems like the right approach. So let's zoom in for a second, and before we close this out, I would like to just ask you, what is it? You know, you often work with people who are near the end of, like end of their life. What is that like for you? On like a personal level.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I think in doing this work, I try really hard not, I don't to center myself. It's not about me, it's about other people. But I also can't deny the fact that it does affect me. It is really hard. Andrew's death was really hard. I got so close to him with working with him. And it was, husband, you and I talked about this after Andrew passed, but it was especially hard because I was like, well, I'm just his lawyer. Like I have to have like this awareness of like who I was in his life, and like there's so many people who knew him so much better than me, longer than me, and so there's like I felt almost like selfish in grieving. Like who am I to grieve when there's so many people who are hurting so much more than me? But then invalidating what I'm feeling and denying what I'm feeling, that doesn't help me. That doesn't serve me either. So I think it is really hard to process this again. Like I'm just the lawyer, but I'm also a lawyer who's doing this work because I care deeply about these people. And so, yeah, when a client passes away, it's hard. Um, and you just have to take time for yourself. Um, yeah, you just have to take time. It's I'm trying to remember when I got the news that Andrew had passed away. Me and another colleague who was really close with him, Megan, who was
Yeah,
also I think
Megan.
on the podcast
Yeah.
before. She and I were texting and talking, and um, I think we just ordered like pizza and junk food and just did stuff that made us really happy. Like we listened to music really loud, and I painted, and it was just like we were like, I think Andrew would like the way that we're processing this. And it was like we're eating a lot of like, yeah, pizza and just, yeah, listening to great music. And just kind of finding like happiness and connection even in that really, really sad moment.
Yeah, I'll speak to that too. I was obviously in the larger perspective, I was pretty close with Andrew, but when he passed, I'm around his mom, Susie, Steve, Kelly, Katie, and like even someone like Strev. I'm like, man, I actually haven't known him that long in the grand scale of things. I was like, these people are going through something. I kind of felt like what you like described. I was like, who the hell am I to even grieve about this, what these people have lost, this force in their life. I felt like guilty almost, like, having that, like having him be that like important like in my life. But yeah, I think I learned through you and through like talking to like other people and through Kendrick Lamar that we all grieve different, and everyone has their own like process. But before we close it out, I gotta ask you a question. I'm gonna pass it on like over to Strev, like Andrew used to do to me. But before I get to that, what is your favorite type of pizza? Um,
Mm, I think I don't think Angie's gonna like my answer because I kind of like bougie pizza, and I definitely don't like deep dish, and I'm sorry. I know
it's
I
okay.
got some Chicagans on that. I like a bougie pizza. I like a you know what is it, Napoli style. I don't know, like the
Oh yeah.
really thin crust with like the bubbles and the chard and like the
Neapolitan.
Yeah, that's
yeah, thank
Neapolitan.
you.
Yeah.
My brain, I was like, I kept on going Napoleon. I was like, that's not right. It's not Napoleon pizza. I don't think the French make good pizza. But yeah, so I think I like a bougie pizza. But if I'm getting like an every man's pizza, it's gonna be New York style.
Mm.
I'm sorry. Do I have to leave the podcast now?
Soon.
No, that's acceptable.
What toppings though?
Yeah, toppings though.
Okay. You guys really are gonna kick me out. I eat a weird pizza. So if it's like the Neapolitan style, I'm probably gonna do like a margarita or something like that. I don't know. Maybe a quattro formaggi. I don't know. But if I'm doing like greasy pizza, I know it's bad, but I really like pineapple and jalapenos, and sometimes I even put olives on it. I eat still like I'm pregnant. I don't know what to say.
Pineapple is actually grown on me.
It sounds fun. Yeah.
I just want to clear
Okay,
up one
thank you
really
for not
important thing for everybody. Deep dish pizza is what we take when someone comes from out of town. But like if me and Strev, which honestly every time I go visit like him, when we go get pizza, we get some tavern style, which is that thin crust pizza. So locals in Chicago actually like thin crust. You can't eat deep dish all the time, but you can eat.
Can't eat it all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, first of all, it takes forever to make. Like,
yeah,
I used to work at a pizza shop when I was in high school, and people would order it, and it takes so long to make.
takes time.
And also it's like pizza lasagna. I don't know. I don't like it.
I get it. I get it, but the tavern style, you can't hate on that. But anyway, Strev, you got anything for us?
Yeah, so a lot of my questions were answered, so thank you for that. But I did have one question, that kind of circles back to um, the Canada method, where a lot of these opponents of MAID have this slippery slope argument where they kind of think that these safeguards are going to just fall out, or the snowball effect that will go the direction of Canada, or worse. They even say like if we let MAID laws go into effect, then B will happen, and if B happens, then C will happen, and so on and so forth. And then they're like, oh gosh, and what if B happens? But I guess my question for you is, well, it just seems kind of like a hypothetical philosophy more than an actual legal argument. Does this argument actually have any weight in the legal system and in courts?
I don't think so. No, I mean, first off, like the slippery slope arguments are incorrect in the United States. Like these laws have been on the books since the mid 90s, and we haven't seen any of these slippery slope fears happen in the United States. And Compassionate Choices, which is like the leading voice in this movement, always is advocating for these safeguards to be in place. And so I think we're not saying the slippery slope arguments play out first and foremost. In court, when you have these super hypothetical arguments that the folks are kind of relying their case on, that's not an actual issue or controversy before the court. And so oftentimes the courts find that the plaintiffs don't actually have standing. You have to have like an actual harm of something that has actually happened, not something that your fear is going to happen. You know, it has to be something that is reasonably imminent and likely to happen. So, or already has happened. So
Right.
we have had cases where, yeah, they're just slippery slope after slippery slope argument, and the court is like, this isn't actually what's happening, and there's no, because it's not actually happening, there's no harm.
Hmm.
We do see a lot of cases kind of get dismissed on those grounds.
That's good to hear, because that was always an argument that just kind of irked me the wrong way. You know,
The
I took
super,
a
the
bunch of
yeah.
classes in college and stuff, and it just seemed like it's not like the way that, you know, I'm not a legal professional, but it seems like everything should be done incrementally, if that makes sense. And that's just kind of like skipping over things and kind
Yeah.
of being careless. And
And
um,
ultimately, I mean, ultimately, the place for those slippery slope arguments and to figure out the right solutions and to prevent those slippery slopes from being realized is in the legislature, not the courts. You know, if you're worried about X, Y, and Z, then talk about it when, you know, at the legislative level. Put in more safeguards, or when a bill is going to be passed, you know, make your arguments there. That's the proper form, because they're just policy considerations. Um, they're not actual legal harms.
Um, I got one more question actually. Hopefully you're not too low on time. But you know,
Nice.
like the posture of like compassion and, like in choices. That's something I've been thinking like a lot about. So like when you had a different Supreme Court, you know, uh, when and you had a different government in place, you guys might be advocating for stuff. Well, now you might be more like in the defensive like posture. Can you like talk about how you guys have changed as like an organization with the new climate that you're in?
You know, I think we've always done both, even when the courts were friendlier, even when the political landscape was friendlier. I think we've always been advocating for the passage of medical aid and dying and other end of life options on a state level, and then having these kind of defensive um, lawsuits where, you know, even in when the courts were friendlier and again the political landscape was friendlier, we would still see legal challenges to medical aid and dying laws wherever they were passed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, unfortunately, like I don't see an end to defending against those kinds of lawsuits. I think they're going to continue for a while. Um, but and even now when things are a little bit scarier, we're still working on at the state level to get these laws passed, and then also working at both a state and federal level to make sure that, yeah, folks have are able to access whatever treatment option they want. You know, we talk a lot with compassion choices. We talk a lot about medical aid and dying, but that might not be the right option for a person. They might not be eligible for it, because, you know, if you, like, for instance, have like dementia, you're not going to be a candidate for medical aid and dying. So we want to have the widest range of end of life options available to make sure that a person can see everything that's available and figure out what is right for them. Because again, it's not always going to be medical aid and dying. A person also might just, you know, that just might not be the way they want um, that just might not be the right option for them. So I don't know. Um, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
No, I mean that's actually super interesting. Strev, you got anything else?
um, I do not. Just thanks for being my friend's lawyer. Uh, no, it really is a commendable and noble thing that you're doing here, and putting your emotions on the line, like we said. And so thanks for all
I
that.
Yeah, I feel so lucky to have known Andrew, even in just the limited capacity. Although, you know, again, I was his lawyer, but he would also like text me at like 9 at night about Tom Petty. So, um,
You're a Tom Petty fan? Nice.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't even know how we got on the topic of Tom Petty, but I remember cooking one day and I'm just like texting Andrew about Tom Petty because he told me he went to the concert, his last
yeah.
concert.
So one of the coolest things at the concerts that I went to, like Andrew with, is we got to see Tom Petty, me, Z, and Andrew, basically like a month before he passed, maybe 2 3 weeks. It was one of his final shows. That was my first Tom Petty show and my kind of introduction to Tom Petty. I'm a big fan now, but yeah, Andrew was. Every time I think of Tom Petty, it's always I always think of like Andrew.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I learned so much from Andrew, and like he has had such a, like an ongoing impact to so many people. And I think, when we were talking earlier about like feeling like our grief was selfish, like who am I to be so sad? I think that just also goes to show like how special Andrew was, that even like his lawyer, even these people that he might have only talked to once or twice were so like heartbroken by his passing and so affected by his life. And he just he lived such a great life, and he was such a good example of how to live your life. He was a great person, and I think I see his effect carried on so much through his friends and even within the organization. I mean, people still talk about him. He was just really, really special, and so I just feel lucky to have been able to get as close to him as I was, and just to be able to work with him on something that was so meaningful. And like, also, what an incredible person to be dying and decide that you want to be in a lawsuit to try to protect this option. Even, he knew that like the lawsuit wasn't going to resolve before he passed, and yet he still wanted to dedicate his time to it. He was just such a example of selflessness. Just a really, really good person who thought about others so much. And I don't know, I think that's evident in so many areas of his life. So I
Yeah,
just feel really lucky to have known him, and then to get to continue to get to know him through his like loved ones, who I am now, thankful to know as well.
yeah, for sure. Right back at you. He just had this ability to just acquire cool people in the world. Um, a lot of my friends that I hang out with nowadays in California are actually, they're friends of his that became friends of mine after he passed, and he has a really unique set of friends and like people that he collected, like I say, in life, and they're all just really cool, kind, compassionate people. And like me and him talked about this a lot. I think, well, he never said this straight up, but this is me speculating. But I think he just really wanted to be like a force for good. Like he realized what was happening to him, and he could channel that energy whichever way. And I've seen him. Trust me, that like sickness, it was tough. It was one of the toughest things I've ever seen someone go. Probably the toughest thing I've seen uh, uh, someone go through. I always tell the story. Like one of the worst things I saw was, one of the feats of strength like I saw was, he actually Strev meant like a lot to like Andrew, and their friendship was so cool. They're just so goofy and like funny. Some of the like one of the coolest friendships like I've ever seen. And Strev was getting married, like what was it, August 2021, 2020.
September.
Okay, so September, and Andrew was in bad condition at that time. But we both were like obviously like invited, so we decided to go. He struggled on the plane. The wedding, it was really hot during like the wedding. The sun was just blasting on
It
him.
was brutal.
It was
Yeah.
brutal. Like he was already going through a tough time, and he toughed it out. He never complained. Honestly, that wedding was so much fun because we just got to hang out and chill. And he went through all that just because he thought it was like the thing to do. He just, and then we all draw strength from him to this day. So those acts that like those feats of strength that we know, um, we it does help in my like everyday life too. Anytime I'm down, or maybe I'm working out or something, or going through something, you think of Andrew, and it does give you strength because a lot of that is like mental, and to be able to see someone go through it was just like incredible. And the fact that he wanted to be that person for us, and is such a blessing. He could have gone it to, he could have taken it in any other way.
Yeah,
I,
just such a highly empathetic individual, and yeah, I'll never forget that he made it out there for that. And gosh, and it was just 2 months before he passed away. It just makes it incredible.
Wait, so
Um,
that wasn't that 2022 then, Strev?
yes, that was 2022.
Okay. Oh, so wait, your wedding was 2 months before he passed?
Little over 2 months before. Yeah.
Wow, that just the timeline is wild, actually. Then, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's when he was really,
So that just goes to show
yeah,
how crazy it was. I mean, just his
yeah,
resilience is insane, actually.
yeah. It's actually pretty insane. Strev, he's a marathon like runner now, like I can say that. And we'll talk every now and then. And yeah, I think to have something like that, to have someone like that to give like a group of people inspiration, I think that like the effects of like the positivity that he put out into our worlds anyways is like incredible. I think I would be a way more cynical human being if I hadn't met Andrew. You see so much shit in the world. There's so many reasons to doubt other people and all these things. But yeah, like I always like, especially I've been in the business world. I've gone through some shit there and just seen like kind of the dark side of people. But like Andrew was that story, just that person who showed like it doesn't have to be that way. There are people that to the end, that's just who they are, and it's amazing to have known people like that.
Was it your bachelor party that you played golf at?
Yeah, we did the bachelor party out in Oceanside, and it
I
was
he was telling me about that, and I didn't realize it was you until just now. But he was telling me about that, and I told him. So I played field hockey growing up, and so I told him that I can't golf because I hit the ball like I'm playing field hockey still. So I have to like like it's like Happy Gilmore. You have to like run
oh
up to it.
wow, yeah.
And so he told me he was gonna hit some balls like Happy Gilmore. So I don't know. I didn't get to see it. I don't know if he actually did, but he told me he was going to. So please, if he didn't, don't. That's a good memory in my head that I've created. So, but yeah, I didn't realize that was you until just now. That's awesome. I remember he talked a lot about you, and now it's all kind of clicking.
Yeah,
Yeah, that bachelor party was special also.
yeah, that was fun. These guys all flew out. And not just Strev, but all of his friends and like Andrew's friends, they all flew out. Man, that like happened in like the blink of an eye, huh? That was like
Yeah,
that was like June of that year or something like that.
it's definitely not something where I think about of as of like the quintessential bachelor party. Obviously, like we went to Oceanside for a reason, and just hanging out with Andrew and having everyone there was just special in its own right. Um, but yeah, good times.
Yeah, it's cool to reflect. I can't believe it, but it's been over 2 years now since like Andrew was passed. And Jess, thanks for being the first person because now it's the end of the podcast, so we're done with all the legislative and more deeper questions. But yeah, thanks for being on here because I've been really wanting to get back to do to like record some episodes. I've been like, who should I interview, and who should we talk to? And there was all these people, but it seemed like it was bound to be you. And I think yeah, I think and it made perfect sense too. And yeah, thanks for being our first you know podcast guest with me and Strev at the helm.
Yeah. Well, you guys are my first ever podcast, so
Oh
thank
wow, nice. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Well, hopefully you had fun. We'll close this out, and we just thank you for being here. We love Compassion and Choices. I think it's a great like organization. I haven't really encountered an organization like them like before, and hopefully people like enjoy this episode because I definitely did. Thank you
Thanks
guys.
for having me on.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.